Good morning. Happy New Year. And I'm glad you're warm and that you're here this morning. This is one of my favorite gospel stories because it points out to me and to us some of the differences between how we in our 21st century culture treat children and some of how they're treated or were treated way back when. There was no helicopter parenting here. And for those of you who sort of even tend to verge towards that, you were probably aghast that it took Mary and Joseph a whole day to figure out that Jesus hadn't gone with them. And then it took them 3 days to find him the day after they arrived back in Jerusalem. So it's 5 days they're without Jesus. Can you imagine? They didn't know where he was. We would have called the cops. There would be helicopters out all over the place. But he was 12, for one thing, and 12 was almost an adult. Probably kind of what we might think of 18 or 19-year-olds that are about to go to college in terms of responsibility. And Jesus had a different agenda. He was probably, we would call him a strong-willed child. I had one of those. I have one of those grandchildren, very strong-willed. Very clear about what they want and don't want. And so Jesus' response to Mary and Joseph is, why were you looking for me? Didn't you know where I was going to be? Why were you worried? Didn't you know that God's in charge? And I was going to be fine? And of course, we, 21st century people, are going, no, they didn't know that. Even in retrospect, we would say, why would you let a 12-year-old meander around a big city by themselves and not know where you were meeting them before you left Jerusalem? But Jesus also encourages us to think about why was it and what was he doing and how was it that he survived those 5 days? So he's in the temple, our equivalent to being at church, and there are grown-ups there, and they're listening to him, and they're answering his questions. They're taking him seriously. Again, sort of a, would we do that with a 12-year-old? Do we do that with our 10-year-olds? Do we do that with our teenagers? Do we do that with our 20-somethings? I remember being in West Virginia at a church, and we were thinking about, it was getting to be annual meeting time, you know, when you're trying to figure out who's going to be on the vestry. And I was dealing with a vestry that was mostly in their 60s and older. And I suggested that maybe one of the young parents would be a good candidate. Oh, well, she's so young. Well, she had children already. Really? And you wonder why there aren't more young people in church. But these elders in the temple in Jerusalem actually did welcome Jesus, and they did take him seriously. They were amazed, so this was not the norm that a 12-year-old would stay, but clearly they welcomed him. They didn't say, where are your parents? Do we have permission from your parents to do anything with you? They encouraged his questions. They taught him. He learned, they learned, they both grew. Are we willing to learn? Are we willing to grow? Are we willing to welcome people that we might think don't belong, but they do in Jesus' understanding? He was confident enough in his own self, even though he was needing to learn more things, that he knew he belonged there. It was his father's house, not Joseph's house, but his father's house, God's house. And God's house is where he belonged. And he expected that he would be taken seriously. Do we think we're being taken seriously? Are we willing to take other people seriously? Are we willing to ask questions? Are we willing to listen? And sometimes I know that for me the answer is no. So I assume that some other people, sometimes the answer is no. What I'm hoping is that this is a reminder that at least some of the time the answer ought to be yes. That at least some of the time we ought to be able to figure out how to open ourselves up for more learning. You're never too old. You're also never too young. You're never too young to offer something. You're never too old to offer something. My mother, bless her soul, died in October at the age of 99 and 7 months. She didn't quite make it to 100. But probably for the last 3 or 4 years, she said, I'm no good for anything, which wasn't entirely true. And what I kept saying to her, and what I've said to some of the really older folks in my parishes in the past is, even if you don't think that you can contribute something positive in the sense that you can do something, you can help other people learn how to be helpers. And guess what? You can learn how to be helped. And it is impossible to help someone who refuses help. So it's always a two-way street. And it's interesting to me, not to go off on a tangent, but I'll go off on a little tangent, that the older we get, the more we forget that helping and being helped is part of interdependence. And yes, we're taught from a little age that we're supposed to do it ourselves. And even a 2-year-old will say, I do it myself. But there are times when we really ought to be, please help me. And that's okay. But somehow we've learned that it's not okay to be the person who's helped. So I'm saying today, here's an opportunity to broaden our horizons about how we live in the world, how we act as a church. I see the sign over the door outside in the narthex. We change the world by being the church. And part of being the church is being welcoming to other people who are different than we are, which means we maybe have some curiosity about who they are, and maybe some willingness to share and ask questions and to listen, both, and to help, and to be helped, to ask for help, as well as to offer it, because it takes both. It takes both of us. It's one of those things that I'm still trying to figure out in my marriage of 5 years. We were both really independent for long enough that it's a little hard to say, yes, please help me. It's hard for me to think sometimes of where do I need help? Where is somebody else's gift larger than mine, bigger than mine, better than mine? They can do this better than I can. And so let me ask them to help me either get better at doing it myself or even more, do it themselves. How we work together and how we help the world out there. And yes, ask the world out there to help us. It's not it's not a one-way street. It's not even a one-way street with God. Part of what we do is ask God for help. But the other part of what we do is we give to God what God wants. At Eucharist, we say, we give you ourselves, our souls and bodies, all of us. The offertory, the offering that we bring is a way of physically saying, this is us, and we're giving it to you to help you do what you want to do in the world. Jesus was 12 in this story. And he reminds us that we all have a place. That we all have a place of learning, a place of asking questions, a place of offering, a place of receiving. And where and how do we live that out? Doesn't matter what your age is. You always have something to offer, and you always have something to learn.